Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Anything Mentionable podcast. I believe this is our 6th episode. Am I right, Sam? I think I am right. I'm talking to Sam Esquivel. I haven't mentioned him on one of these yet, but I need to because he makes the magic happen here. And so thank you, Sam, for that. I'm really excited and deeply honored by my guest today. His name is the Reverend Dr. Stephen Cady, who's the president of Brite Divinity School, a nationally and internationally respected institution based here in Fort Worth. I think he's been here 2 years now.
Year and a half.
Okay.
Almost 2
I was
years
wondering
in
if it was
March.
okay. Been here 2 years now. He comes to Fort Worth from Asbury First United Methodist Church in Rochester, New York, where he spent 12 years and had a very successful pastorship in a thriving congregation. And I want to say hi to any of those folks who might be tuning into those. I'm sure you're very fondly remembered there.
No question. I love those folks.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. And a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary. You've been preaching, lecturing, and teaching all over the world, which is very cool. And really cool is that you studied acting as an undergrad. You're in the running for most interesting man in the world with that little piece of your bio, but you've done plenty of stage work and commercials before you went into, I know I'm embarrassing however, we're going to put your chops to the test before the end of this conversation.
I really appreciate that.
I know you do. But anyway, thank you so much. I've gotten to know Stephen over the last year or so, and he's someone I greatly admire. He's a person of kindness, wisdom, and moral courage.
Thank you. I feel the same way about you.
Well,
honored to be on your podcast.
That's wonderful. So we're speaking on a warm Tuesday evening in November, and it is in a moment in history that I think is an inflection point of history. And I think we're of a mind in that. And you said something at a recent event at Brite that kind of jumped out at me. You said the world, speaking at this event, you said the world is in a moment of transformation. And I don't believe it's in the direction of God's mercy, love, and justice, which means that each and every one of us has work to do. So talk about that some more.
Sure. Well, I want to name that what I meant by that is a reference to the vision of Brite Divinity School, that our vision is a world transformed by God's love, mercy, and justice. And that's our aim. That's what we're going for. That's what each and every one of our programs, it's what each and every one of our classes, it's what all of our relationships and interactions are about. And looking around the world right now, it's clear that we have not yet reached that destination. And things are changing. They're just not changing in the direction that we hope for or that we long for. And I think the signs are almost everywhere you look that we are not taking steps towards justice. If you think about the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion that we have seen in the last 9 months, 10 months, 11 months, it's clear that those are absent from the kind of world that is being advocated for out there right now, and that's a problem. It's a problem for Christians. To be clear, diversity, equity, inclusion are not the end of our faith. They're just the beginning. Diversity is the first step towards what Christians are really after, which is unity. But diversity is a part of unity, and it's the first part. And equity is a step towards justice, and inclusion is a step towards love. Those are all things that we are going for as Christians, and I do not believe that that's the direction we are heading right now as a society.
Our first conversation had to do with this.
Yes.
And how you continue to stand up for these principles in this environment. And I know that it's not been easy. but I was looking at your website and reading your literature today. And as you say, you have a very bold vision. I mean, to seek to do the things that you seek to do. You're not putting your light under a lamp. You're doing it.
It's a good biblical reference.
This is what we're here to do. And I think that to be in your line of work in this time is a real challenge, but it's also a real opportunity. And for the people who are your students and that you're getting ready to send out into the world, I think that you tell them that this is an opportunity for you. Because it is such a difficult time, and when cruelty is not only tolerated, but celebrated so widely. That to me is the most mind-boggling piece of this whole puzzle. And of course, at the top of my list of concerns in this moment is climate crisis, but that's another story. And the dishonesty and the greed and the hatred. It's hard to imagine a time, and certainly in our memory, where things have been in such open display. And I wonder what's at times what it does to our insides, what it does to our souls. However, I believe, and one of the reasons I want to talk about this today is I have a dream, a vision, a fantasy that things like the Beatitudes that we're going to talk about today and things like the prayer of St. Francis will be the basis of a renaissance, a cultural, spiritual renaissance in our world, especially in the West. Because as we've just said, these things cannot be contradicted. These things are principles that every human being at their core probably knows are true. That these are the things that speak to who we really are as human beings.
And I think they relate, in some ways, they point to why the world doesn't seem to be transforming in the direction that we are hoping for. In other words, if they become a kind of measure by which we can take stock of where we are, they become the ruler or canon. That's, of course, the means ruler, right? If they become the ruler by which we measure where we are, you can read something like the Beatitudes and ask ourselves, right now, are we living in a world in which the poor are blessed? Are we finding ways to bless the poor? And I think the answer is fairly clear on that in almost every capacity that we're looking for. And we just saw it in the government shutdown. Who suffered at the hands of this government? It was the poor, and it was borne on the backs of the poor. And it wasn't until it started to affect those with some wealth, when airports stopped working like they should, when people couldn't get from one meeting to the next, that's when we stepped in and said, oh, actually, we probably ought to bring about some kind of resolution to this challenge. It's a statement about what we care about. And I think the challenge of something like the Beatitudes, but it's not just the Beatitudes, it's almost every way of understanding the Christian faith. And I speak from the Christian world. I'm not saying that the Christian world is the only way to look at this, but certainly in almost every measure, what we're seeing right now is kind of the opposite of the Christian world, in which we're called to care for the poor, the oppressed, the downtrodden, those who are suffering. And right now we are causing suffering to folks. We are putting oppression upon folks. And I think we are seeing the results of that in a kind of world that we're creating. It's downstream of the cruelty. It's downstream of all the other challenges that we're facing.
I wonder, though, to push back on that a little bit, if there isn't there isn't a counter narrative starting to take shape, that these things are in such dramatic opposition to what you perceive to be the lessons of the life of Christ, that, I wonder if this current moment hasn't done more for the Beatitudes than anything in the last couple centuries. Because, people are wanting people know the truth. Most people know the truth starting, and they are turning to these great truths.
I pray that is the case. I fear, though, I mean, we are 2 months out of the shooting of Charlie Kirk. And just to be very clear, what happened to him was reprehensible and sinful and wrong. His assassination was wrong, and I pray for his wife, and I pray for his children, and especially those people who can't get that image out of their heads of him being killed. I also recognize that when Charlie Kirk becomes the face of Christianity, we all ought to mourn, because what he stood for was the opposite of Christianity. He may have professed Christian faith at home. I don't know. I didn't know him. But what he put out into the world day after day was the opposite. It was not about blessed are the poor. It's not about inclusion. It was about exclusion. And contrary to popular opinion, the Christian faith is not fundamentally about love of God and love of country, or love of country and love of family. It's about love of God and love of neighbor. Those sound similar, but they're very different orientations towards life.
As I understand the life of Jesus, and I have a very meager understanding compared to present company, but his whole mission was to turn away from the dogma and into a relationship with God.
No question.
Therefore, and through that relationship, people would have the courage and the wisdom and insight to say that when we include the outsider, we are benefiting not just the outsider, but we're benefiting ourselves. And so much of like Christian nationalism, I don't recognize in that story at all. Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not being fair to them, but I just don't see it. And so it's been heartbreaking to me to see that associated with Christianity.
To be clear, it is not Christian. It dresses in Christian clothing. It baptizes bigotry. It does all of these things to try and appear Christian. It's Christian-esque. It even uses the name of Jesus, but it's the opposite, right? You cannot stop at love of country and family. You have to love God and neighbor, which means not just the people who look like you or think like you or vote like you or love like you or have the same gender identity as you or happen to live on some side of the same side of some arbitrary border as you. It has to be everyone. That's the whole point. That's what makes being a Christian so hard.
Well, my last guest was Kevin Kernot, who had an amazing story. He lost everything. He was paralyzed by a madman's bullet, and he went through the extremely dark night of the soul and discovered a place within himself, that a place of light and love. And basically his deal is, with everything he's gone through, is that he just loves everybody. And so we were talking about this at this table, and I said that part of the solution is to love everyone. And Kevin says, yeah, that's right, but let's be clear. We're talking about everyone.
Yeah.
We're talking about people we disagree with.
Yes.
And no matter what they have done. There is really it's an absolute. Is it not?
It is. It's so hard.
And it's harder than hell.
Yeah.
Not to invoke. So anyway, tell me about the Beatitudes. What were they? What was the Sermon on the Mount, and what is the significance of? I think it appears in both Matthew and Luke in various forms. Just riff on that for a little bit. What are the Beatitudes, and what do they mean?
Yeah. So to be clear, we're talking about. It starts at when we say the Beatitudes, we're typically start talking about Matthew chapter 5. It starts at chapter 5 and it goes on for some time.
Does it?
In Matthew's gospel.
So
right?
It's not just those 8 Beatitudes.
No.
It goes on forever.
It's the Sermon on the Mount, and that sermon is long.
Okay,
right? So the Beatitudes are the very first part, but it keeps going,
like,
right?
Kind of one of your sermons in church?
It's like, yes, yeah. At the end, you'll either arise inspired or awake refreshed. That's the hope. to try and find our way through whatever we're preaching on that day. But, so that's the Beatitudes. I want to be clear, just because I know that there are going to be biblical scholars out there listening. Look, we really have very little access to what Jesus actually said. What we have are these 4 Gospels that are written 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years after Jesus, who are trying to tell us something about what does it mean to live as people of faith. Matthew's Gospel is trying to connect with his Jewish roots and understand who he was. And so he's using Jewish language, and he's using these kinds of sermons and these stories to tell the story of who Jesus was. Some people look at that and think, okay, well, if there are these 4 different stories, then can we really believe any of it? And I say, that's up to you. I mean, I find there's beauty in the fact that they don't tell the story of Jesus in the same way, in the same order, or in the same words. I think there's gift in that, and I've always trusted that where there's truth, there's God, and we need not fear truth wherever we find it, because God is already there. So let me give some caveats that way.
Okay.
So when we get into the story, what we're talking about is these Beatitudes, and they are pretty radical. But some people would say that they're not as radical as they once were. I know I have a good friend who was a biblical scholar who passed away a few years ago. He was one of my predecessors in my previous role. And he would say, actually, it used to just say the blessed are the poor, but that was too radical. And so that they had to add in spirit later on, right?
I mean, when?
Well, the idea would have been, some redactors later on, it was too radical for the Roman Empire of the time. And so in order for it to survive in whatever form it could survive, they had to come in and adjust it a little bit. Later editors, redactors, people who came in and helped translate the faith into life. But if you don't want to get too far down that road, let's just say the Beatitudes as they stand are pretty radical even today. If you think about a faith that is trying to turn on its head the power structures that we have. We've spent the last 10 years talking about what does it mean to make America great again, and this idea of a kind of masculinity, a conqueror. Well, the people of the ancient world were looking for a king as well, and Jesus came in and turned it on its head, right? They turned that idea on its head. Jesus came in and was a servant to all, right? Cared for all, loved all, was not just interested in dining with the people who were elite, the people who had money. He was interested in dining with the poor and being with anybody and everybody and bringing as many people to the table as possible. That is what the Beatitudes are trying to get us to recognize. It's inverting the power structures that are typically there in our society.
Well, that's also the beauty of the New Testament, is he went out of his way to do those things. He made a point of doing those things.
Yes.
And so allow me to be a little more literal in what you're suggesting. I'm a poor Catholic boy from Minnesota who wants, So anyway, the mountain is probably somewhere near Capernaum.
Sure.
See, I'm betraying my ignorance. And you just answered one of my questions, is what do you think people were thinking? I was wondering if we could kind of play a game here and try to paint a word picture of what that moment was. In my wife's New King James Bible, the commentary says, in the tradition of the Jewish people, he was probably sitting when he said those words. Well, again, let's assume that it was something close.
Could have been.
In the 12, I think he picked his 12 disciples around that same time. It might have been just them. It might have been a multitude. But when those words, it's assuming that they were close. At that time, when those words are coming out of his mouth, what do you suppose the disciples or the people who were listening were thinking?
I'm of two minds about how to answer.
Well, we've got time, so you can.
So on the one hand, I think what's important to note, and especially in the moment in which we find ourselves, is Jesus was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
He's a rabbi. And what he is sharing is not such a radical departure from his from everything that he has learned, right? He is interpreting the law. He's making sense of what the Jewish faith has always been about, and therefore what the Christian faith is about. So he's not taking some radical departure that they would have been completely shocked. Maybe what they've been shocked by is the fact that he's being as clear and concise with it as he is. I have no way of knowing that, but I do think he was a pretty consistent guy in terms of the way that he approached the care for everyone, trying to bring as many people to the table as possible. And I do think that is radical probably in every age, because it's so hard for us to do. We get into our own heads. We get in our own way. We hold people at arm's length. We tend to be fairly tribalistic, and we want to bring to the table the people who look like us and think like us and smell like us and vote like us and worship like us. And Jesus was saying over and over and over again, that's too small-minded.
Why has that piece of it been, since he was clear, why has that piece of it been so obscured?
I think we tend to make God in our own image. And I think it's a lot easier to just try and bring the people around the table who make us comfortable than the people who make us uncomfortable. And so we try and find our best justification for that. And there's probably scriptural justification that folks use for that kind of thing. But in the end, the reason why the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain, I tend to go to John's Gospel that just clarifies, by this they will know you are my disciples if you have love for one another. He says later on, I give you a new command, that you love one another. That's it. Love one another, which sounds so easy until you actually, try it, because then you have to deal with all the particularities and the challenges of every individual and recognize that is something you can work your entire life on and still struggle. But in my mind, the gift of that struggle itself is life, that we find life in the midst of that. I will say on almost every sermon I preach, love leads to life. I believe that's the gospel in 4 words. What do I mean by that? I mean that when we love, that is, when we take a step towards another person in love, and we're not talking heart-shaped boxes here, we're talking about a way of meeting the person in their particularity and honoring both who they are and who they long to be. That kind of mutuality, that kind of love, when we meet somebody in that space, we suddenly find life for ourselves. There's a gift in that for us, not at death kind of life, but right now kind of life. So why is it so hard? Because I think it's intimidating to stand before somebody and be honest.
All roads in my life lead to Fred Rogers somehow. One of Fred's gifts was he was very good at that, because even when he was dealing with someone even unpleasant, someone who's cruel, he would say, his default was not what a terrible person that person is, but his default was, I wonder what happened in that person's life that's causing him or her to behave that way. It's a sort of compassion. And the other thing he said was, it's much easier to love someone when you know their story.
Yeah.
And that has been true in my own life in so many ways. One of them being when I first learned of the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, and as a white boy grew up in rural Minnesota, I knew nothing about any of this. And when I started to learn about it in writing the book that I wrote, and to try to provide context of what happened in Tulsa, I was horrified. I was surprised, but something changed inside of me. I started looking at people different than me in a different way, with a sense of curiosity, with a sense of compassion. It was expansive. Learning that history was expansive. It was soul nurturing for me, and so part of my sermon over the years has been, we don't have anything to fear from this. Yeah. We have just only to gain. And the other prominent example of that is my dad. with my relationship with my dad. It's like when I learned, and I had this.
It's a beautiful part of the play, by the way.
Yeah, well, it's probably one of my favorite parts of the play, and we're talking about "I'm Proud of You," the play, which is based on "I'm Proud of You," the book. My friendship with Fred Rogers. And Stephen and Russ Peterman and their wives were kind enough to come out and see it in Arlington. Went on a really special night. But he was this godlike figure for me who just seemed so ashamed of me. And I was craving his approval and could never find it. So I say to Fred, after we got to know one another, I have a question to ask you. Would you be proud of me? And he responded in the way you'd expect Fred to respond. But then he said, tell me about your dad. What was his childhood like? And so when I started to ask my dad, and I heard about the horrors of his childhood and realized that he had given me 10 times more as a father than he had received, everything changed. And which is a long way of saying that when we can apply these principles that Jesus was talking about, not only does it benefit the poor, not only does it benefit the oppressed, not only does it benefit the excluded, it benefits us. It expands us in a way that's very hard to articulate, but it does. And I think one of the reasons, that somewhere out there there's a kernel or people say that is why we continue to aspire to these things.
Sure.
Because it makes us better. Yeah. It makes us happier. It makes us more peaceful.
I think about that in terms of my own anti-racism journey, which I think is a daily task, right? It's not like I took a class and checked that box and now I'm on the other side of it. I think it's a daily moment where every single day I have to think about how do I show up in this world as a white, straight, cisgender male. I get privilege not because I asked for it, but because that's what society has given me, and I have a choice about how I use it. As I think about that, though, so I was doing this work, I started to recognize, I thought back through, I have a PhD, and I'm not bragging about that, but I'm saying that meant I went through 26 years of schooling. So I have 26 years of schooling, and what I realized in doing this work was, in that time, I think I did not have a teacher or a professor of color until graduate school. And while that in and of itself is not racist, what is that I didn't notice. And part of that is about I did not recognize that I was missing something. And that until we recognize that as individuals and as a society, that we are all missing something if we don't bring as many different voices to the table as possible, then I think we're going to keep finding ourselves challenging. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to tell us. This is about everyone, not some of you. It's about all of you.
When I look at your faculty, see the faces on your faculty, and a beautiful bunch, if there ever was one. The reason diversity is important is not to as a white person to be some kind of do-gooder. It's because of what you just said. There are layers and layers of humanity and experience, and that when it can coalesce with our experience, wow.
Yeah.
And so it's not about being a better person. It's not about I'm going to heaven because I'm following the teachings of Jesus, and I'm good, and it's about something way deeper than that, and something way more magical than that. And this is what we're missing out on right now.
Yes.
It's just.
And as somebody who cares deeply about the faith life of young people, look, I care very much about the United States and what's happening to the United States right now, but I care much more for what's happening to the church. And I will often say, because it's true, that everything lastingly good in my life has come one way or another from the church. And I mean, my sense of hope, my sense of inclusion, my sense of justice, my sense of humor, such as it is, all of that has come one way or another from the church. And I went into ministry because I looked around at one point and I realized that almost none of my peers could say the same thing because of the hurt that had been caused by the church, particularly my siblings of color, particularly my queer siblings. All of them had experienced something in the church that was not life-giving. And I felt like, well, that doesn't have to be the way. And it's not the way of Christ. It's the way of the church. And I think right now we have a responsibility to try and change that narrative and bring people along. And so I fear what's going on with our world right now because, frankly, when folks who are not promoting the way of Christ become the face of Christianity, we all ought to mourn. And it's going to be another reason why an entire generation doesn't darken the door of the church. And yet, what you said is true, that people are recognizing right now that not all that glitters is gold, and that all that they have been consuming is not actually feeding them, and that we can all get to a point where our homes are full and our lives are empty, and they're looking and longing for something, which is an opportunity for us to step in and remind people of the way.
That's a huge opportunity.
No question.
And God works in mysterious ways. I've heard that someplace. I don't know if it's biblically sound, but
well, I think it's probably true.
Part of my comfort in these times is, and it has to do with my own kind of spiritual study over the years and some of the wisdom teaching I've been consuming, is that I've heard the Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago.
I remember it well. Sorry.
And, it's been unfolding in a semi-orderly way ever since, right? Somehow or another, electrons or whatever it is congealed into this, right?
It is pretty miraculous.
It is, one of the things we don't do enough as humans is appreciate the miracle of our own existence. And I just don't think that God checked out.
No.
And I just got back from Europe for one of my first big trips, and I saw the cathedral at Strasbourg they started to build in the year 1015. It took them 400 years. And until 1877, it was the tallest building in the world. But it's 1015. And so maybe this is something that'll pass.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're having this conversation.
Sure.
I know what you're doing. I know a lot of people who are just heartbroken, but who are in very quiet and loving ways are working to make a difference. And it's going to manifest. Where did we go? Would you read that? Would you read Matthew chapter 5, 1 through 10?
Sure. And seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven."
I added something from a little bit further down the sermon.
Mm-hmm.
And as I told you before we got on, it's one of my favorite passages from the Bible, one of my favorite verses. Another one is Jesus wept. a preacher friend of mine said that he loves that verse too, because when they're making him memorize Bible verses, that was an easy one. I don't know if it was Russ Peterman who told me that, but I don't want to throw us under the bus. But over the years, this has stuck with me. I'm 60, about to be 68, and I heard it for the first time when I was probably 6, and it stuck with me. And I think that consider the lilies of the field is one of the most beautiful phrases ever written in the English language, and I realize it's a translation, but even in that. So Matthew 6:27 to 29 and 34, excuse me, which of you by worrying can add one cubit to his stature? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, and yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. And as we talked about earlier, I think the second piece of Matthew speaks to the root of so much of what afflicts us as human beings, which is fear. Mm-hmm. Fear of death, fear of a lot of things. And I think one of the things that happens just in the normal course of human events is that as we're children, we're taught that we're not good enough. We're not this. We're not handsome enough. We're not beautiful enough. We don't have enough money. We don't have the right job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We don't. But we do, right? Jesus is saying that we do.
Absolutely.
I mean, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry. And we can take this to a whole nother level in terms of kind of the quantum physics aspect of reality. And some traditions that I've been studying are very almost scientific in describing an afterlife, and that's the big part of Christianity too. And one of my favorite metaphors is by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist Zen master, who says we're like waves in an ocean. We're waves for a very, very brief time, and we're beautiful and we're important, but we're individual, and then we fade back into the ocean. Mm-hmm. And so, but the point being is, why worry? If we have faith, and if we have some kind of understanding of what all these teachings are, it's like we don't have to worry. Even like Kevin Kernot, even the most massive affliction known you can imagine. Viktor Frankl went through the Holocaust.
Yeah.
But when there's this reality kind of percolating in our souls, we don't have to worry. And so that's why I think
it's a beautiful passage. I think the challenge of it is that it's been abused. Mm. And I think there are those folks who, when they start to experience anxiety about the present moment, they're made to feel like they are somehow not faithful enough.
Oh, yeah.
That they are not not living out the way of Christ, and so they feel like, well, I've disappointed. I'm not supposed to worry. It says here, and I'm not supposed to worry, and so then they feel this kind of burden. Where I think the intention of the passage, the hope of it, is that actually to get at what you were trying to say, or is starting to say, that you are enough. Like we grow up and we're in a world where from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to bed, we are inundated with messages, sometimes on billboards and sometimes in conversation, that just remind us of the ways that we have failed, the way that we don't have what everybody else has. And I think the promise of faith, the hope of faith, is that we are enough, that just as we are, we could never do anything. I mean, so I'm a Methodist, so I come at this from an idea of grace, and I have this understanding that this grace that comes before, we didn't do anything to earn it, we can't do anything to take it away, it's ours. That is something that gives us the ability to kind of let go of those fears. But I I would hate to have someone who holds a worry feel like they're not being faithful because we have worries. I also think it's trying to put it in place that we can always worry about tomorrow, but we also have some stuff we've got to get to today. And I think there's a challenge in that for us to look around for this moment and say, what can we do right now?
Right.
I always think about that quote from Augustine, and it's a little patriarchal, but the idea of, what does he say? Hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger at the way things are and the courage to change them. That's a powerful idea for me, that you can't get to hope without anger and courage. The anger is really paying attention.
Right.
What's going on?
Boy, that raises a whole nother, I, like a lot of people, have been trying to figure out how to feel.
Yeah, me too.
About this time. And anger is definitely a piece of it. And sadness, of course. And, my deal is, if I'm angry, I'm angry. But thank you for making that point, because you're exactly right. And I've suffered in that way too. That I'm not faithful enough if I'm hurting. Yeah. And as Fred said in the play, God can handle our whole gamut of emotions, and again, get having a real wild tangent, but my prayer life is, God, I'm hurting.
Yeah.
Period.
I think that's why the Psalms are so beautiful.
Right.
The Psalms have this wide range of emotion. There's praise Psalms, but there are also these lament Psalms that are just so broken. And in one of the Gospels, it's a lament Psalm, Psalm 22, that Jesus utters from the cross, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? Think about that statement. And there are 150 Psalms in our Bible, and in some Bibles 151, but you have 150 Psalms in our Bible, and they run the gamut of human emotion. And sometimes we're happy and sometimes we're sad, and they are all over the place, but they're honest, and I think that's helpful. And for me, sometimes it's really helpful to think these Psalms were the hymn book of the ancient world and of our ancient siblings, and boy, they had the same kind of worries and fears. And I think about, Psalm 88, I believe, that ends, most lament Psalms, they go through the lament and then it ends with something like, but we know you're still God and we're so grateful for you. But Psalm 88, I think it's 88 that ends, all my friends have abandoned me and I'm all alone. The end. That's it. And I think, thank God it's there, because you know what? Sometimes we feel like that. Sometimes that's what our human experience is like, and I am grateful that it's there in our scripture to be able to recognize and to feel, because other people have felt that way before, and in that very moment, that's sort of an irony, right? In the idea of somebody 3,000 years ago saying, all my friends have abandoned me, I'm all alone. Suddenly it's in that reading that we recognize we're not alone. Right, that we see in that moment, because somebody else has expressed their experience, we see that we are not alone in our experience.
I really appreciate what this vein and what you're saying about the Psalms, and how that last piece of Matthew could be a source of suffering for people if it's interpreted in a certain way.
To be clear, I find it beautiful as well. Consider the lily of the fields. I absolutely agree with you.
But to draw a line under all this is that it's really complicated to be a human being.
Yes.
And we need to accept all of that.
Yeah.
In addition to opening our hearts to others, and expanding ourselves in ways that are beneficial to everyone, including ourselves. Sometimes it's just harder than hell to get up in the morning.
Yeah.
And that is part of it. That is that is part of being human. And I think that when I said one of my favorite lines of scripture was Jesus wept, that's what that speaks to me. You know, he suffers.
Sure.
He suffered. He suffered not just on the cross, but he suffered. He was a human being.
Yeah.
And in the process of, as part of being a human being, he was in the middle of all this complexity, emotional, spiritual, cultural. So I just think it's part of what would be good to do right now is everybody take a deep breath. And have a conversation with a good friend.
Yeah.
And seek. And pray. And accept. And have self-compassion. And in the process, it's not a very sexy path, but that I think that's where our healing as a world is going to come from.
Absolutely. And it also points to why there's a need still for communities of faith, for people to show up for one another. I find, personally, I recognize that there's a longing for people who are going to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. And while communities of faith have sometimes really failed at that, there's a recognition, I think, that's starting to dawn on us that we only get by with a little help from our friends, and that, if I'm going to get to this point where I can consider the lilies of the field, if I'm going to get to this point where today's worries are enough for today, it's going to take some help and some other people reminding me of that from time to time. Mm-hmm. I think that's the beauty of communities of faith. Now, sometimes they do that poorly, and sometimes they don't show up for one another, but I think my favorite theologian is somebody named Howard Thurman, and he's a mystic and a practitioner, and he's an amazing man. We can go on and on about him. But he says, we come before God with a smell of life upon us, and we come before God without the need to pretend in any way. And I think we are best for one another when we can show up for one another in the same way, where we can get rid of pretense and not pretend to be anything we aren't, because all day long, all those images that we just talked about that you have to see over and over again that remind you of what you have not achieved, of what you haven't gotten, of the grade you never got, the position, the bank account, whatever it is, we are trying all day long to pretend, and we just need people in our lives for whom we can let go of the pretense and just be. God is that for us. That's why we're enough for God. We don't have to earn God's grace. God already loves us. But at our best, we do that for one another, and in so doing, reveal God.
Yeah, I talk a bit about taking the mask off.
Yeah.
And revealing this mess that we pretty much all are.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories with my Mr. Rogers adventures was a friend named Parker Schenecker took me to arranged for me to speak to a group of junior high students in Tampa, Florida. And they brought them out. There was about 1,000 of them. They brought them into the gymnasium, sat them all down. This fat old white guy's because there was an inner city school and a lot of black and brown faces, which is amazing. This flat old white guy's going to talk to him. So I told him the story of my friendship with Fred, and a lot of it was this. It's like, would you be proud of me? It's like, what? Because I'm hurting. And Fred, Anyway, at the end, and they were very, the language of the heart has no age, and they were very receptive, and they were very attentive. And at the end of it, I said to them, before I leave, I got a secret to tell you. And I could just sense them leaning forward in their seats. I said, the secret is I'm a mess. And this roar of applause goes up. And I said, wait a minute. I said, before you get carried away. I said, I got another little tidbit to pass along. And they kind of leaned forward again. And I said, you're a mess too. Every last one of you are messes.
Yeah.
I said, well, but you know, there's another word for mess. Anyone know what it is? And there's a little girl in the front row who said human. And I said, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
And I said, and here's, and so here's the best news. I said, you're a mess, I'm a mess, but we don't have to be messes alone. And then they just took the roof off this place. And I'll never forget that. Because that is what we're talking about, right?
And if you're looking to be a preacher, I know a great school that could help you out.
Well,
sounds like you got the chops for it.
You're talking about complexity, you're talking about suffering, you're talking about joy, you're talking about love, you're talking about scripture, you're talking, just this massive and beautiful mosaic of life that I think that is a great comfort to us in these times. I really just, it means so much to have this time with you.
I'm honored to be here.
Your courage and your wisdom, and it's hard to, in what you're doing at Brite, and those faces on your faculty, and it's hard to be pessimistic. And you're one of the many people who bless my life, in this way. And so it's very hard to be pessimistic. And I think that the truth of us will prevail. Talk about the Beatitudes being unassailable. Maybe we've assailed them a little bit here today.
Sorry, I didn't mean to disabuse
maybe you've given fodder. Maybe you've given fodder. But another thing, my favorite deal is, and I think another thing that is unassailable is the prayer of St. Francis. And I memorized it years ago, and I think I still have it. Which I memorized like the first half of Wordsworth's Ode and the Prayer of St. Francis. And it's in the play.
Yeah.
It's right at the end of the play. And I thought people will understand this after we've finished our little exercise at the end, but I really kind of hesitated about having it in the play because I thought it was too out there. It was too religious-y. That was back in 2023 for the premiere. But as time passed, it became one of my favorite moments of the play. And I think that it speaks, even the scene we're about to interpret happened in 2001, right after September 11th. And so do you want to do any warm-up exercises?
Lips, teeth, tip of the tongue. Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. But
what a to-do to die today, at a minute or two to two.
It's scene 21. I want to give Harry Parker a shout-out.
Great man.
He's a great man, and it has to do with what we were talking about. He told me this at lunch the other day. He said so at some point early in a student's experience at TCU in the theater department, he says to them, and I might be mangling this story, but hopefully the spirit of it will. He gets, anybody gets in the theater department has got stuff going on. They're good. So he gets them together and he says, "You're enough. You're enough." Can you imagine? Someone, with that kind of, carries that kind of weight with those students, and he's telling me, "You're enough." That's one of the, so kudos to Harry. He's my good friend, and he made this play happen. So it's nice to give him a shout out, and he's such a great guy. Scene 21. My brother. This autobiographical play. My brother had just died, My brother Steve had just died of cancer, and Fred had been with us through that process of his suffering and death. And Steve had become a great man in his own right over the course of his illness. But in this scene, I'll just say, I'll just read, and I'm going to read the role of Tim. In 2001, I made the trip to Pittsburgh. On my first night in town, Fred and I had a long talk over dinner. He talked about his decision to step away from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood after 900 episodes. He seemed a bit sad about that, but at peace with his decision all the same. For most of the dinner, though, we talked about Steve.
You know, Tim, there's a thin veil between this life and whatever comes after it.
I assumed there would be many other visits, many other conversations. We spoke next on the telephone a few days after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. He was stricken and horrified, but ultimately chose to focus on what his mother said to him when he was young.
In times of trouble, Freddie, look for the helpers. The helpers are always there.
Fred, as horrible as this has been, I'm glad I was alive when it happened. I feel like there's a chance to make a real difference in the world.
I feel the same.
I'm reminded of the words of one of my favorite prayers. I bet you know it. It starts, "Dear God, make me an instrument of your peace."
Where there is hatred, let me sow love.
Where there is injury, pardon.
Where there is doubt, faith.
Where there is despair, hope.
Where there is darkness, light.
Where there is sadness, joy.
O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console.
To be understood as to understand.
To be loved as to love.
For it is in giving that we receive.
It is in pardoning that we are pardoned.
And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
Amen.
The two of us were silent then for a long time as our words drifted out into an ailing world. Thank you for this.
Thank you for having me.
Our words are drifting out into an ailing world. You're a great man. Thank you.
Honored to share this moment with you.
This has been the Anything Mentionable podcast. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you next time.